most presidents are cautious about mixing religion and politics. They really are, because of the time-honored tradition of the separation of church and state. Most of them really did adhere to that approach.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in Massachusetts.
There were the times at the White House when various religious occasions were observed in such a dignified way. You think about Christmas at the White House, although, it really was not, for most presidents, where they would turn it into a sermon about the story of Christmas. Some of the presidents observed the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. Barack Obama had a Passover Seder every year.
It's easy to look at the Trump White House and say, it's not like it used to be. But my guest this week is a journalist who covered every president from Carter to Obama and who can testify to how things were and how they appear to be now. Coming right up, former White House correspondent Peter Maer. We need voices like Peter's to be heard now more than ever, so please make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. Taking a minute to do these things really helps other people discover our show and become listeners too. Our library of past conversations includes almost 200 hopeful, empowering, and inspiring interviews with guests like Amy Spitalnik, Amanda Tyler, Reverend Amos Brown, and many, many others. You can help us keep growing The State of Belief with a financial contribution right now. Find out how at stateofbelief.com, and you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. Before we get to our interview, I do want to just mention, you've heard us talk a lot about the lawsuit that we put against the Trump administration around the Religious Liberty Commission. It was very much our position, and we maintain that position, that it was not representative of the American people, and it also was not constituted in a way that was included transparency and all of the rules that should guide these commissions. The judge dismissed our lawsuit this week, and that was disappointing, but I do want to say that we were able to put forward a different vision of religious liberty using this lawsuit and explaining to the American people that a commission that is entirely made up of Christians who have one political viewpoint and one Orthodox Jew who also shares largely that political viewpoint is not a balanced commission. We also were able actually to force the commission to release transcripts of their conversations and create a little bit more transparency. And so I think the important thing is that we were able to shine a spotlight on a manifestation of religious freedom that actually doesn't serve the American people. It serves one part of the American public, the small segment of Christian nationalists who want to promote the idea of America as a Christian nation that privileges a few over the many. We were able to put forth a different vision with our Religious Freedom Report that you can find at Center for American Progress that included 20 voices of amazing people from different points of view, including humanists, including Sikhs and Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Jews. And the point was that actually religious freedom is for everyone. And we have to hold fast to that idea, that religious freedom is an idea that is not meant to privilege any one part of American society. And I think we have the benefit of being right. And so we will continue to fight with you, alongside you, and for you as we go forward. But I did want to give that update about our lawsuit. And now to my guest. Journalist Peter Maer first reported on the American presidency for Mutual Radio in 1977. He later served as White House correspondent for NBC Radio, and from 1998 until retiring in 2015, Peter was CBS Radio News White House correspondent. His tenure spans the terms of President Carter, President Reagan, President Bush, President Clinton, another President Bush, and President Obama. In those 29 years, he also covered every presidential campaign, convention, and elections from 1980 through 2012, earning 5 Merriman Smith Awards from the White House Correspondents Association. Now, Peter tells his story in a new memoir titled Chasing the Story, A Reporter's Journey to the White House. I couldn't resist having him back on The State of Belief to talk about it. Welcome, Peter. I'm so glad to talk to you about this great new book you've released.
Well, Paul, I am just so flattered and honored to be here. You know what Interfaith Alliance and you know what State of Belief both mean to me. And this is just quite a moment for me to be with you.
Well, I am thrilled. And let me just say, reading your, I guess it's a memoir of sorts, but it's also history. And that's what struck me is I was reading through your book and I was like, oh my God, I like all the things that I had kind of forgotten, but that make up the cumulative effect of American life. You were there and you were reporting on them. And one of the benefits of this amazing book, I'm going to say the name again for anybody who wants to get it. You can order it on Amazon or anywhere else. Chasing the Story, A Reporter's Journey to the White House, is that you remember these stories that were huge at the time, but now have kind of faded in our current moment. And one of them, I was just thinking oh yeah, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, that was a huge moment, and yet it had faded from my my memory. But you were there, you were covering it, and it's just so great. So big kudos on this book and all the way that you managed to capture what was happening in an important time. One of my first questions, and I say this as someone who has spent some of my life doing journalism and telling stories, is how does it feel to experience history as a journalist, as someone who's tasked with telling this story? It is a different way of experience history, isn't it?
It certainly is. And, there's so many things that happened that I never anticipated would happen. I don't know if I can do them in chronological order, Paul, but, you think about the impeachment of a president. You think about that, and that was Andrew Johnson. Uh-huh. But I covered it from start to finish with Bill Clinton. The election of the son of a president. You think of John Adams and John Quincy Adams. You had George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. I never imagined that. And I have to admit that like so many others of my generation, your generation, we never envisioned the history-making and important moment of the election of our nation's first black president. I didn't fathom that I would ever have the opportunity to cover such a momentous event, but I was there when Barack Obama started his campaign, when he announced in a frigid day in Springfield, Illinois, all the way to Grant Park in Chicago, where he declared his momentous victory. Yeah.
Incredible. But, I think what's different about it, because, I remember most of that, we're similar ages, but I wasn't tasked with telling the story. And you had to figure out, well, what do I lead with? What's the main message of this moment? So that's very exciting, I think, as a journalist, because you're, I remember you were at one, when you were just starting out, you said, I had an editor who really followed the principle, if it bleeds, it leads. And that only carries you so far. It does carry you far, but then when you get into the kind of milieu and the stratosphere that you worked at, you have to think in different terms. What is the story here? And I think that is something that's a skill. That's what makes a great journalist versus someone who kind of just is a recorder of history. Can you talk a little bit about that skill?
Sure. I grew up in a very small town in Illinois. Well, it wasn't all that small. It was about 40,000 at the time, a place called Granite City across the river from the Mississippi River from St. Louis. It was a steel town. It was a melting pot. I was the only Jew in my graduating class of about 800 kids. By the way, never had any type of an anti-Semitic incident. People always wonder about that. But when I covered stories through the years, I always thought, what would the people in Granite City want to know about this? And it really was my anchor. It was my North Star. It was my guidepost, Paul, to wonder what the people in my hometown, the steelworkers, the doctors, the lawyers, the laborers, the folks I grew up with and their moms and dads, what would they want to know about this Labor Department report on unemployment? What would they want to know about this summit between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev? Or the night of the capture of Osama bin Laden and the drama of President Obama announcing that. So I
Yeah.
always went back to that as basically my starting point.
That's the ultimate question. Like, I have an audience. How am I going to speak into my audience? How am I going to use language that my audience will understand? I mean, I think that is like that's a journalist. And also, like, a lot of your work was in radio, which, is so it was your voice also, like that, how, speaking into that. I think that's very exciting. And we still have radio, and many people, like, still get their information, their news from radio. But more and more it's coming in different ways, and online, and digitally, in all kinds of ways. What in particular, like, about radio was so powerful?
Well, I always wanted to be a newspaper reporter when I was a very young kid. And then on the days after President Kennedy was assassinated, there was a public park across the street from my home in Granite City, Illinois. I keep going back to that. And I looked at the newspaper reporter for the newspaper that came out twice a week. And then I saw the radio guy standing there, and he was describing it as it was happening. And I just love the idea of the immediacy of radio. I'm not saying that I was bit by the radio bug that early, but I did have an opportunity soon thereafter to do a weekly radio show at the local radio station. And from then on, I thought, well, no, forget about newspaper. I want to be in radio. I love the immediacy of it, and I love the challenge of painting what one of my bosses called word pictures. He said, turn your microphone into a camera. And just the fun and the challenge of describing things as they were happening, sometimes live and sometimes recorded. And as you were indicating, Paul, there's been just this evolution. Look at the medium that we're using now, a podcast. Who would have ever thought? And podcasts are, just the main source for so many people now. Their main source for news and entertainment, and in the case of State of Belief, a little bit of both, and information too.
Yeah, well, and actually, interestingly, podcasts are still about voice, about hearing people say things, and being, and it becomes relational. And so, I mean, like, that it is an interesting medium that podcasts really kind of kept alive in a very intentional way. You talked about immediacy. For some reason, I'm flashing on that story of when George Bush Sr., I think, got ill in Tokyo and threw up. Again, another thing that I had forgotten, but at the time was a huge story. And you were at your post and actually were able to kind of paint the picture before a lot of people were able to get it out there. I mean, that's a perfect example of telling the story.
That was one of the scariest moments of my career. We were in what we called a press filing center in a hotel in Tokyo, and a pool of reporters would be traveling with the president. And I was not part of the pool that evening. So I was at the hotel, and we looked up on the TV screen, and we see flashing ambulance lights and two guys holding a sheet trying to cover the picture. As it happened, they never took President Bush out in an ambulance, but we knew something was going on. And I went up to a Japanese hotel worker, one of the servers in the hotel, and I said, "What are they saying?" And I still can hear his voice saying, "They say your president has fallen back." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Maybe stumbled, maybe fainted, or maybe heart attack.
Oh my gosh.
And we didn't know for a while what had happened
Yeah.
until President Bush's able press secretary, Marlin Fitzwater, was able to assemble the facts and come in and tell us that perhaps President Bush overdid it with a tennis game in the hot sun in Tokyo and
Yeah.
had the effects of maybe the flu or maybe heat exhaustion.
Yeah.
But it
But
was
you were
very
able to,
scary.
it was scary, but you were also able to say something quickly to folks that something has happened.
Exactly.
And I think that that kind of discretion, we're not sure, but something has happened. I mean, that's an important thing. So let's I attended President Carter's memorial service in Washington D.C. and just very moved by him and can you tell me anything about, like, specifically, I'm thinking about the accords that were, the at Camp David, and what was it like? Because you had kind of followed Carter from the beginning, and so you knew who this guy was. It's interesting. I was just talking to people about my interviews with Jimmy Carter and, like, how intimidating he was. Like, people think of him as a kindly, peanut farmer and, school, church school, kind of thing. He was so smart. He was so on it. He was, like, when I was interviewing, he was in his 80s, I think. But he was, like, completely in control. And it was awesome because he was so in control and in command of his incredible intellect. But you had followed him, but this was such a major accomplishment. Do you remember those days?
Oh, absolutely. I first covered Carter for WSB Radio in Atlanta, the major station there then and still, and covered him when he was governor in the State House. He had more or less of an open door policy with reporters in the governor's office. But I always say about Jimmy Carter, what you saw was what you get. I mean, what you got. I mean, he was just humble guy from Plains, Georgia. I'm not saying that he didn't have an ego, because you don't get to the Oval Office without having some kind of an ego. I envy you for having the one-on-one interviews that you did with him. It's an opportunity that I really never had. But I will tell you this. In, I think it was late 1974, I was among, and I described this in the book, a small group of reporters, along with my boss, the news director, invited to the Georgia governor's mansion for an off-the-record roundtable. Literally, we sat in a circle around Carter in the ballroom or the living room of the governor's mansion, and of course the conversation came around to, "Gee, Governor, there are rumors that you want to run for president." And he said, "Absolutely." And I had to bite the inside of my mouth to keep from laughing. It was just, beyond belief that Jimmy Carter was going to run for president. His own mother, when he told her, "I'm running for president," and his own mother, Lillian Carter, said to him, "President of what?" And the headline on the Atlanta Constitution was, "Jimmy Who is running for what?"
Oh my gosh!
But
that
he got
is wild.
There was
Yeah.
a poll, I think it was a Harris poll, and of who the potential nominees in 1976 were, and Jimmy Carter was like at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
But he got the last word.
Yeah.
He really was savvy in knowing in the post-Watergate era that running on the motto of "I will never tell a lie," and quoting his mentor, Admiral Hyman Rickover, when Carter was in the Navy, submariner, of "Why not the best?" Those, were the hallmarks of his campaign, and it was just an amazing thing to see happen back then.
Yeah. Well, you noted, and I just want to remind people, because it's a helpful reminder that I got actually at the memorial service, and this is directly from your book. Jimmy Carter fulfilled a pledge to name minorities to key posts. When he left office, UPI reported Carter had nominated 4 times as many women judges as all previous presidents combined, and twice as many black judges. So I do think like people tend to talk about his post presidency, but anyway, it was fun to read about your recollections of Carter. Up next, more with Peter Maer. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And you can also tell Alexa, Gemini, or Siri to play the podcast, The State of Belief, on any enabled device. I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe, share, and rate this show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush. My guest is Peter Maer, author of the new memoir titled Chasing the Story, A Reporter's Journey to the White House. Moving on to Reagan, very different, someone who I, have no love for, but you talk about his observance of the 40th anniversary of Normandy, and that you were there, and that struck me as someone who understood a historic moment, and rose to the occasion rhetorically, but also understood what it meant that moment, and how important it was. Can you talk about that moment and being there?
Well, I was privileged to be at Normandy on the 40th and on the 50th with President Clinton. And another anniversary with George W. Bush. It's quite a moving place. I wish every single American could go there and see the place. As for the 40th anniversary, by the time Ronald Reagan got done with his oration at Pointe du Hoc, you would have thought that he had been there himself, although his World War II experience was looking at films as part of some sort of a special services unit in California. But he did know his place. He was a guy who would look down and where's my mark, to stand at the right place. Right. And he had, incredible media advisors, a guy named Mike Deaver, and Peggy Noonan was the speechwriter extraordinaire. And she wrote the address that he gave that day. A lot of reporters, you had to station yourself in different places. A lot of reporters went to the more well-known Omaha Beach or Utah Beach, but a colleague of mine that I was traveling with was told that this was going to be the hallmark speech at Pointe du Hoc. For those who don't know, it was a place where Army Rangers scaled straight up cliffs and came under intense German fire, but eventually took that territory. And Ronald Reagan was standing there above the English Channel, above those cliffs, and this jut of a rock that pointed out Pointe du Hoc, and he was surrounded by a semicircle of veterans of that battle. Some of them had their sleeves tucked in, pinned back where they had lost an arm, or a pant leg where they lost a leg. And they were on crutches and some in wheelchairs and others standing upright. And Reagan said, these were the boys of Pointe du Hoc. These were the men who helped to, I'm paraphrasing, win the war, save the world. So it was quite a dramatic scene, and he played it to the hilt.
I use that in some way as a setup to talk about the current president. Who you did not officially cover, but you must have a particular take on how he uses moments. He went to Normandy, and like I do want to get into like how you understand what it must mean to do the kind of job you did with all of those presidents and have to do it now with this president. But let's talk first of all. Do you recall, like recently, he went to Normandy, and do you remember, like he didn't use the moment. Well, he used the moment for what he wanted to use it for, but it was I don't I think it was far from admirable.
Yeah, I mean, it just, I'm tempted to say, don't get me started, but please do get me
Yeah,
started.
I am going to get you
Uh,
started.
I am an institutionalist when it comes to the presidency and to the White House itself. And as I write in the book, and I have to tell you, there were people who said, don't go there, don't talk about Trump. You didn't cover him. Well, I'm sorry. I just feel that, I'm not sorry. I just feel that it's just something that had to be said. And I listed many of the misdeeds of Donald Trump in my estimation. And I feel that he has absolutely denigrated the office of the presidency, and he has desecrated the White House itself, paving over the Rose Garden, demolishing the East Wing, gilding the Oval Office that I felt every time I went in there with six presidents was a goosebump moment. I'm not being hokey. That's just the way it was. And if you don't get some sort of a feeling every time you walk through the gate of the White House, as I know you have, there's something wrong. I'm sorry, that's just the way I always felt. And this guy disgusts me.
Yeah, but I just think, like, in moments like that where I guess take me into the idea of, like, what does it mean to cover a president like that in the press? And I immediately go to, like, the I don't know, is it five or six, a half a dozen women who have been denigrated using terms like like
Piggy.
really piggy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, how can someone do that? Like, how? I don't know. You explain to me how that is permissible with the office of the president, with the press corps, who are asking questions that have been asked of presidents since the beginning, or at least as long as we've had press, which I guess is the beginning. And is there any precedent for this? Is there any? I mean, there have been adversarial relationships, but not that.
Well, I never saw anything like that at all. I know for a fact that there were times when presidents were irked at questions that I and others
Sure.
asked. And you could tell, and maybe the word was given to you later on by someone in the press office, but never, on anywhere near the level that we have seen. And it is just so personally, again, disgusting to see the way he has talked, especially to women and to people of color. It's just bully tactics, and reporters who are dedicated to covering the White House or anything else, you don't want to become part of the story.
Yeah.
And people say, well, why don't they react? Why don't they go back at him? And it's just that inner feeling that, well, I don't want to get engaged with him. I suppose I'm only imagining, but there are reporters that he just doesn't like, but he does like to tangle with them. And I can't imagine what it's like for them. I asked a colleague during his first term, how are you dealing with this? And this is a highly respected person. And he said, well, we'll just cover him the way we always do. We'll play it straight. And I don't, you have to play it straight, but you have to put some context on it too in terms of his behavior.
Yeah, it is. But also, like, the way, I don't know. We could go on for hours about this, but I do think, like, the it's of a piece. He's about to, talking continuously about how he was robbed of the election without any proof in 2020. But he also is, like, sows distrust in the media. And, like, everyone in the media is against me, except for his, preferred brands. And then if they do any story against him, he'll attack them. I mean, like, even Fox News had gotten the ire of Donald Trump recently. So, I mean, I think the importance of the press, not a perfect thing, but it is about telling the story of what we can know, and mistakes all the time, but trying to, as best we can, tell the story. And I just felt like I feel like at this point, he has sown so much distrust in the press, in government institutions. All of it is geared towards undermining any institution that would challenge him and his sense of you know, his rightful place as the ruler of America. I mean, it really does feel like that. I don't know. I'm curious what you think about the correspondence dinner and the decision to hold it and all of that. I mean, you can pass if you want to, but I
No,
just feel it felt it felt uncomfortable.
it's a long-standing institution. Full transparency, I was on the board of the Correspondents Association, served as secretary and a couple of other positions. It's a wonderful organization that really fights for access and fights for, pushing for certain travel logistics and coordination and things like that. And the dinner exists for scholarships, to raise money for scholarship money for young journalism students. Um, I personally would not have gone if I were still there. I wouldn't go to a dinner with this guy who just continually trashes a free press.
Mm, I admire you for that, and that seemed
It's an easy call.
it felt like an easy call to me as well. I do want to talk a little bit, given the nature of the show where religion and democracy meet, like, are there stories from your storied career about religion and democracy or religion and politics that you recall being big moments for reporting and that are worth remembering as we, continue to cover religion and democracy in this era?
Well, there were the times at the White House when various religious occasions were observed in such a dignified way. You think about Christmas at the White House, although it really was not for most presidents, and I'm really digging into my mind here, where they would turn it into a sermon about the story of Christmas. It was more of how would you describe it? You're a minister. How would
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I went to a Christmas celebration with at the White House, and
Almost civic the way it was.
yeah, it was used as a civic celebration
Yeah.
of the holiday.
Yeah.
But of course there are religious specific moments in the White House as well.
Right. I mean, they observed some of the presidents observed the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. Barack Obama had a Passover Seder every year with his Jewish staff members and other staff members to talk about the story of Passover.
Yeah, well, let me interject there. So one of those people ended up being a colleague of mine at Huffington Post, and so I did a whole thing about about the Passover tradition because it was when he was being on the campaign trail. They decided to have a Seder, and then all of a sudden the president walked in and was like, "Is this where the Seder is?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it became a tradition, and the same people really were invited. It's incredible.
Yeah. So I think that most presidents are cautious about mixing religion and politics.
Yeah.
They really are. Just because of the time-honored tradition of the separation of church and state, that most of them really did adhere to that approach.
I'm thinking there's just moments when religion kind of comes in, and I'm thinking about like with Barack Obama and his pastor, and there was this moment where he had then Senator Obama gave a speech like kind of articulating his vision of religion, and I think so many like I'll just say the presidents that I really cotton to are the ones who actually were able to articulate a really important vision of religion and the public square. I think Carter did that amazingly when he said, I don't want to invite Billy Graham to the White House because it will feel like an endorsement of a certain kind of religion over another kind of religion, was a very powerful thing to do because he was actually a pastor he admired, and Carter himself was a serious Christian, however you describe him.
Absolutely.
So I'm just wondering if there were moments when you were reporting where you're like, oh, religion is the story here. Do you recall? I mean, because I know that's a tricky moment for like political reporters or people covering the White House, but there must have been moments where, oh, actually religion is part of this story.
Well, I'll tell you, I always said that I was a reporter who happened to be Jewish, not a Jewish reporter. But that said, I found myself at the places where my people, including my family, were profoundly affected by Holocaust sites. When we went to different Holocaust sites or to the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland, my grandfather happened to immigrate to the United States from, well, it was then Austria-Hungary, later became Poland. One of the reasons he left was because of the treatment of Jews. So,
Who did you go there with? Do you recall which president?
Yes, I mean, I went to the Warsaw Ghetto with President Clinton, with President George H.W. Bush. They laid a wreath there. I think President Obama also. By the way, Trump was the only president who went to that part of the world and did not go to those sites. So, that they went to, Obama went to Buchenwald. They really hit my heart to be there and to witness those places. I went to Israel, of course, with President Clinton after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. President Obama went there. Not really great atmospherics between him and Netanyahu. Yeah. So all of those things are, in my memory.
I just think that the front row seatedness of it, and that I have to say, like when there is a great privilege with being a journalist in a way, in the sense that, like, you always have an excuse. Where I was, I won't compare myself to you, but like where I was, I kind of always had an excuse to call someone. Because I wanted to tell a story. And so like expanding my Rolodex, those were, when Raphael Warnock was the pastor of Ebenezer before he became senator, but I went to seminary with him, so I could call him for stories. And being a journalist is exciting because you always can have, what is the story? And how do I tell that story? And then what's the next story that comes upon it? And so it's just it is really, it is fascinating. So tell me about how you're. I know you wrote this because you kind of wanted to tell these stories, but part of it was that you wanted your family to know about these stories because you had such an interesting life and you have grandchildren now. And I love that you wrote this. Have they been able to read it? I don't know how old your grandchildren are, or what has been the reaction of your family?
Well, my oldest grandchild is 19 and, a college sophomore, and he was part of the impetus to write this book. Here it is. Here's the book.
Yeah.
Anyway, he overheard me say, someone constantly, I'm sure you hear it too, you've got to write a book, you need to write a book about Interfaith Alliance, or you need to write a book about your career.
Yeah.
And boy, have you had a career. But that's your story. But anyway, he overheard me say, well, who in the world would read it? And he said, I would, and I think you should write it. So I started writing.
I think that's great. I mean, this is, and especially, I think I told you I'm writing I've finished and now I'm doing footnotes and all of a biography of my grandmother, one of the two daughters of Louis Brandeis, and part of my regret with my grandmother was that I didn't ask her good questions. I never got her story, and so I've inherited, papers and photographs and letters that have never been seen between her and her parents. And, and I just was like, oh, in some ways these are like, these are like clues that I'm putting together. I'm kind of, and it's been one of the most gratifying experiences of my life. I feel like in some ways I didn't know my grandmother. And now I get to know her like for who she really was, all of her. And you've offered that to your children, but also your grandchildren. I think it's a great gift.
Well, thank
But
you. It's one of the things that I've really come away with after this project is just the feeling that everyone, you didn't have to be a White House correspondent or a renowned pastor, everyone should write their story for their kids and their grandkids.
I agree with that, and I've been giving these talks about my family and my grandmother, and at the end of it, I'm like, your story needs to be told as well. Like if I'm talking to a synagogue or a church or whatever, like every one of you has a story of the world that needs to be told because it is fascinating when you get in on it. But all that is to say that you've had a particularly fascinating story, and it's really amazing that you can look back on it with such memories. Do you still have the tapes? Like, has anybody done the super tape of Peter Maer? From the beginning to the
Well,
last. That would be amazing. That's a project for your 19-year-old grandson. Tell him I told him so.
yeah, one of my colleagues at CBS News did do that when I retired and surprised me with this kaleidoscope of audio. There's a closet behind me here that contains boxes and boxes of cassettes. You're probably too young to remember cassettes.
Cassettes. No, what are cassettes? What are LPs? No,
But
that's
I
a,
had to.
yeah.
I went back through a number of those to jog my memory for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I regret not keeping a diary. So many of my colleagues, especially some of the esteemed CBS News correspondents from another era. I think of my hero and dear friend, the late Bill Plant. So many of them kept all of their files, all of their notes, and so forth. And I have a lot of notebooks too. So yeah, and I had two major life-changing assignments that I write about in the book. And I went back and listened to the tapes of the 1985 Mexico City earthquake,
Oh yeah.
where I was standing in front of a hospital, a children's hospital, and babies were crying under the rubble, and sometimes they saved them, and sometimes they didn't. And it was the time of the Jewish High Holy Day of Yom Kippur, where the rabbis always speak of who shall live and who shall die in the book of life. And I'm standing there witnessing who shall live and who shall die. And then the tsunami trip with former Presidents Bush and Clinton to the Asian areas that were devastated by this gigantic tidal wave and earthquake. And again, who shall live and who shall die?
Mm.
And the two presidents meeting a humble man in Indonesia, and they said, "What is the fate of your family?" And he said, "They only live in my heart." So these are profound experiences that really stayed with me.
Mm. I wonder, you must have had a chance to meet Walter Cronkite, who was, honorary chair of Interfaith Alliance, and such an important. Speaking of voice, most trusted man in America, and I'm curious if you want to say a few words about him because you didn't do the same thing, but in some ways you both given the honor or tasked with the responsibility of telling the story to Americans of what is the American story.
Well, Walter was truly one of my heroes, and I did get to meet him several times. He, of course, had long been retired from CBS News, but he did come back and did some radio projects, and I had a chance to, I don't want to say work with him because that would be an overstatement, but certainly share a mic and had some times with him on social occasions. And as he always signed off, "That's the way it is." And that's the way he was. He was just a straight shooter, objective reporter, just really just a giant of journalism and broadcast journalism.
Mm.
I can't imagine what he would think of covering the current era. But I think, and I use this quote in the book, and it really resonates, and I know we're getting close to our sign-off time here, but it was a quote from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, the great rabbi and civil rights leader who marched with Martin Luther King. And he said, in a free society where terrible wrongs exist, some are guilty, but all are responsible. And that really, in all modesty, kind of sums up why I felt a responsibility to comment in my book about Donald Trump and about the way he has conducted himself and his administration. We're all responsible to do what we can to right wrongs, especially what we can do for our kids and grandkids to right those wrongs. Hate to get preachy here on you, Reverend, but that's just the way I feel.
Journalist Peter Maer served as White House correspondent from 1977 to 1995. His new memoir is titled Chasing the Story, A Reporter's Journey to the White House. In 2019, Peter received the Interfaith Alliance Walter Cronkite Faith and Freedom Award and served on the Interfaith Alliance board. Peter, it is always great to see you. Congratulations on the book, and thank you for being with us here today on This State of Belief.
An incredible honor. Thank you, Paul, for having me.
I've been asking guests what courage means to them in this challenging time. Selena Stewart is CEO of the League of Women Voters. I want to close with the question I'm asking a lot of people now, like, what does courage look like to you right now?
Oof. Being scared, because there's a lot of scary things in the world. Feeling the fear, but doing it anyway. Whether that is when you see something happening in your neighborhood, people getting swept up, intervening, whether that means posting something that may not be popular because it actually calls out an injustice. Because in a position like me, I could easily be more targeted. I think the league, most people don't think that the league is a target. We're like voter services, voter education, and things like that. But, there are targets even on the league, in moments like this because of our outspokenness for what's right. And we have been very bold and said, many of the policies, it's going to harm people, it's going to harm children, it's going to harm women, it's going to harm the federal workforce, it's going to harm men and access to healthcare in a lot of different ways. But I think courage is doing what's right even when no one is looking. Speaking up for people who don't have a voice, even if it doesn't affect you directly. Just speaking up. And I think that is so important. Speaking up in this moment is what is going to save us, and it's what's required. Anyone who is religious knows, or from a religious background, faith, but even beyond that, I think it just comes down to decency. When you see someone being harmed, are you going to stand by and watch the harm happen, or are you going to step in to try to help? And so I think that is what courage looks like to me in this moment.
Who do you know who would get a lot out of hearing this conversation with Peter Maer? Please share The State of Belief with them, and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. We need your help to continue growing The State of Belief, so please make a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.